Hello, welcome back to another workshop here for our series on Unity, and today we're going to be doing all stuff art. So today, what I want to cover is a whole bunch of stuff, so today will be pretty rapid fire, but we're going to be kind of jumping around, but hopefully teaching a lot of basic stuff that you can use in your games, and we will definitely go from having an ugly prototype to something that looks like a game. So I'll be going over everything about importing sprites, then about using tile maps. I'll go over what those are. Then we're going to create our animations, and then depending on our time, we'll just be setting up some UI stuff. So not really getting into a lot of the UI or the menus, but kind of at least the image part of it. So to start off, we have our first task is to import the sprites that we have. Also, I want to point out, so for this workshop, I want to make a link. I created these sprites that we're going to be using in our game, so when I showcase, like, oh, I'm dragging these sprites, this is what they look like. They're sprites that I made that I provided. I know they're in the announcement, the email link that I sent you guys, and the in the Discord, but if you guys need help finding that, just let me know. Because I'm gonna, like, walk around pretty quick soon after this. And of course we have our helper Pavel here as well, just in case, but I'm going to talk quickly about what it is. But first of all, what the heck is a sprite? So in case it's your first time ever hearing it, it's basically just a 2D image used in a video game. They're called sprites, and you'll hear sprites, not really for 3D, just like for 2D stuff. And I was really curious when making this slide. I was like, I don't know why they're called that, but apparently, like, when computers, really old computers, like cathode ray tube ones, the individual objects, like for example the player or the enemy, would have an image for it, but then it would also have the background image, and the players would only be drawn in the location that they are. So essentially, with a cathode, like an old TV, you didn't have to refresh the whole screen, you just had to refresh and draw that part of the sprite onto the background image. And so essentially, because it didn't disrupt the background image, you didn't have to refresh the whole screen, the engineers were like, oh, these like these objects, since they're kind of floating above the background, they kind of float like mythological sprites. And so that's where the word comes from, which is pretty interesting. And so these are some that we'll be using today. And it's kind of like finding sprites. So these are a couple websites that I personally like to use a lot. So itch.io assets page, a website called Open Game Art, and then also, if you're Unity specific, the Unity Asset Store. I think the Unity Asset Store leans a little bit towards 3D assets. So if you want something like really classic traditional pixel art, I recommend itch.io. And those are all linked as well. And you can, of course, make your own if you want. So the sprites that I'm going to be using today, I made myself. I linked a little video that I think is very useful for specifically pixel art. So today, at least for this section, we'll be importing the sprites that I drew. Or, of course, you can spend some time to find some yourself if you want. We're going to make sure that if you're using pixel art, the correct settings for that, and then also when we have multiple sprites per image, how to split that up and set that up so that we can use it, for example, for animations. So if you haven't used Unity before, here's a little kind of a review, a rundown of the Unity editor window view. So when I say the project tab, that's going to be on the bottom here where all your files are, right? So when we access or import our drawings, that's where those are going to be located. The hierarchy on the left is all the objects in our current scene. The middle is where our scene is currently located. So the scene is like your level editor. Your hierarchy are all the things in your scene or your current level. And then our lovely inspector on the right side, where we have all of our different properties. And in our slides, I'll obviously be referring to these by name, so as they appear in your editor. So when we want to import our sprites, it's really simple. You can just drag and drop it from your File Explorer onto the project window. So I think it's a good habit to create a subfolder in your assets called sprites. And for example, I'm going to create under sprites, I'm going to create gameplay and UI to further separate what kind of sprites I have. It's very useful to set that up early on so that when you have many images, you know exactly where to find stuff. So you can, the way that I do is I just drag and drop it, but you can also go on the very top, there's assets, and then import new assets, and you can select stuff like that. And then obviously you can click on it in your project tab to view it in the inspector. So as all previous workshops, I'm going to be jumping between the slides and our own project here. So this is where we left off from last time. And I downloaded this pixel art sprites folder with all the sprites I drew. So I'm going to go, I already have a sprites folder because we have our temporary sprite there. So I'm just going to select all of these and just drag them all in here. And so they're defaulted, or they're imported with some default settings, and that's, boom, we have them in there. I want to actually create a new folder for gameplay, and then one for UI. I only currently have one UI sprite, which is labeled UI at the beginning. I named them like this, and everybody has a different, preference. I think to make it easier for myself, like whatever is easier for you to find later down the line is how I recommend you organize your things. So my temporary player, I'm actually just going to probably delete later, so I'm not going to put him anywhere. So that's kind of what I have for now. So I have a lot of stuff in my gameplay folder. So, super simple. So now we have to give it a bunch of settings so that our pixel art looks nice and crisp. So this is what it's going to look like at the end. And of course, again, anything that's underlined is links for you to read more. But essentially from the top to bottom, we have pixels per unit. So it's easy to show here real quick. In our scene view, we have these like little boxes. Here, I'm going to try to, can I zoom in? Yeah, there we go. So you can kind of see this grid and there's this gray, uniform box. Those are units, and obviously like the kind of arbitrary. You say yourself like how big a unit is. In my case, when I drew my pixel art, I wanted to have my player be 2 units tall. I don't know, because of Minecraft, I guess. So my player is 2 units tall and 1 unit wide. And so when I go to this setting here, again, a unit refers to the chunk of like space in your scene view, and it's dependent on your assets that you make. When I was making my assets, I'm like, okay, I know my player's going to be 1 unit by 2 units tall, and I just chose 32 pixels per unit because I thought it looked nice, because the lower your pixels, then like the chunkier everything's going to be. So it's kind of like up to you, or up to the pixel art that you find online. But even then, it's kind of like you just kind of choose a number that's like, okay, this looks big enough, this looks small enough. So we put 32 there. For our filter mode, we have point filter, which is no filter. So filter modes are applied when we scale up or down our image, and typically they kind of allow for some smoothing. So if we have like really large or really small images and we scale them up, then we don't have like ugly edges. But for pixel art, we don't want that smoothing, so we get rid of the filter mode. And again, that's a link if you want to read more about what that does. And compression down here, obviously it's kind of like compression in our normal day-to-day use of like, it makes a file of size smaller at the cost of the image quality. So actually compression, if you forget to change the setting, you won't see it when you're making your game, but you will see it when you build your games. I've run into that issue of I make something in my editor for like a month, and I'm like, wow, this looks amazing, and then I actually export it and I play it, I'm like, wow, this looks really wonky, and it's like my pixel art is all wrong. That's because the compression's kicking in. So we're gonna set that to none, also because this is useful if you have really large file size, like let's say you have like 4K textures, right? But because we have pixel art, we don't have to worry about file size really. So I'm gonna go back here. Yes?
Is there any way to save those types of settings so you can then apply them en masse to lots of your assets at once?
Maybe. I've never done that. I've always just manually done it.
I'm just going to select all and then select all the settings.
Sure, we could try that. I think I made all of my assets with 32 pixels per unit, so sure. Let's try here. 32, then I click point, and then none. And I click apply at the bottom here. If you don't, then I think it'll prompt you anyway. I guess we could see. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Select all. That works. I didn't know that either. Wow. That's so helpful. Very nice and easy. Okay, so we have here, we drag and dropped our sprite. We have all of them there. Here's our goal. We set the proper settings in the inspector tab, and in our level so far, we have a temporary goal, and we want to replace that temporary sprite with the sprite that we have, right? So to do that, an important part is to set the color to white and the scale to 1 by 1. And also, if you want, you can adjust the box collider. So what happens is, so we have our goal here, this green thing, and I have my goal sprite. And super simple, we have this sprite kind of box here, and you can click on it, or sorry, actually on the right side here if you want to select a sprite, but then that pops up like every single sprite in Unity, so I find it easier to just drag and drop it onto here. And then you see that fun things happen. So the reason why we have to reset it is because currently our scale has a Y scaling of 4, so that's why it looks very stretched out. So I reset it back to 1, and then it's very green because, how do I do it? Oh, there we go. Because our original color was green, so I set it to white, because this is kind of like an overlay. So I guess if you want to play around with tinting your sprites mid-game through code, you could use that feature, but we don't want that, so we're going to set it to just that. Okay, that looks pretty awesome. I think I'm going to check our box collider here. So that's not cool, so I'm going to probably change it. I'm just going to do it on the bottom here with like a size 2. And then maybe make it like a little thinner. I don't know. It's kind of up to you. So awesome. So that is updated now. So now we have kind of a nice goal, and I can move it. I can move it down with this tool so that it's kind of like actually touching our ground here. Awesome. Okay. And then I want you guys, and also I'm going to just come around and make sure that everybody's on the same page starting off, to do the enemy sprite, to do the same exact thing that we did here, if you have the project set up. And also if you're trying to find these sprites and you don't know where to find them, I want to just walk around real quick and help you guys out. So I'm going to do this enemy sprite as well in our project here. So we have this temporary enemy. We have our settings here already, because I selected all of them at the same time. And I'm going to select my enemy here in the hierarchy view, and then just drag the sprite from my project view into the inspector under the sprite. And as well, he's very red right now, I'm going to make him less angry. And we already had a scale of 1 on 1, which is perfect. So that's our little thing. I don't know, I guess it's a turtle. So now we have our lovely players. So the players are cool because the player sprites are multiple sprites per image. So we have one that's standing, 2 moving. Okay, the 2 moving ones are really similar, but you can tell that the arm and the legs are different. When you put it into the game, maybe not so much, but hey, if you don't like it, you can find your own sprites. And then the jumping sprite. So to do something like this, to be able to access the sprites individually from one image, we in our sprite mode, I will show you real quick. In the sprite mode, by default it says single. We just say multiple, and then we access the sprite editor and have this menu pop up to tell it how many sprites that we have. We can either say by cell count or by size. So in my case, I prefer cell count, which I'll show you real quick what that means. So here at the sprite mode at the top, we have single by default, but I have my player movement sheet selected. I'm going to say it's actually multiple sprites. And I want to split them up, because right now, actually, if you click this little white arrow next to a sprite, you can see how many sprites there are in that image. So of course we have 1 so far, and I want multiple. So I'm going to go to click on this sprite editor button. It's going to say there's unapplied settings, so we click apply. So then the sprite editor tab pops up, and this tiny little tab at the very top that says slice, I'm going to click on that, and then type. I go by cell count, because I know that there's 1 row and 4 columns. So I click on 4, or I type 4 and then 1. You can also do cell size. Let's say you have a really large sheet with many sprites, and you don't know the count of how many rows there are, but you know that there's, again, you have 32 pixels per unit, for example. And so you can say 32 by 32 pixels, and it'll and do it for you. Then I just click slice. Awesome. I exit. It's going to be like, do you want to save? Yes. And now you saw our sprites updated. So when again, they'll be by default collapsed. You can click on it. And to access the individual sprites, to be able to drag them, I could just drag them here real quick, directly, which is pretty cool. So now I can access our player, for example. So I have this, I know that this one is where the player is standing, so I'm going to actually go to my player and update the sprite. And I'm so sorry, but our temporary sprite goes away. Goodbye. It's really small. Okay, it's really small because I need to change my scale back. And I'm going to change my collider. I'm going to adjust my collider so that it's the player. Awesome. Okay. So now it's looking a bit better and less like just a bunch of blocks, which is pretty cool. I'm gonna save real quick my project, and that's just a reiteration of what we did here. And if you do cell count or cell size, it's up to your personal preference, right? So I want you guys to do all the other ones. I think if you do select all with like the settings, it'll apply all the settings for you automatically. But there is 2 more sprites in there, the clouds and the tile map dirt, that need to be sliced because there are multiple sprites in one image. And then that's just a reminder there. I think we don't have any more temporary sprites, but I want you guys to take a look at the clouds and the dirt and split those up. And I have to do these as well for the workshop. So I'm just gonna, so the settings are the same for all the sprites. So I'm just gonna splice my clouds and my dirt block. So I start with my clouds. So I already have 32 pixels per unit. I have point, no filter, and then none for my compression. I'm gonna go to multiple. If you want, you can like hit apply first and then go to sprite editor. Yeah, sometimes if it opens like this, you can't see splice, so you can just open it up and it'll be here. If this isn't showing for you, to make sure that this says multiple here. And then it shows my previous setting, which I don't want. I actually want 2 by 2. There's 2 rows or 2 columns. So these red lines show you where they're going to be sliced. And I'm going to hit slice, and then up here you can actually also hit apply. Most of the time I just exit out, and it's like, are you sure you want to save? I'm like, yes. And again, you can double check that you did it correctly by seeing that you have all these lovely individual clouds that we're going to use later. And I'm going to do the same for my block. I'm going to hit multiple, then go to my sprite editor, and then this one's going to be 3 by 3, so it's like a 9 set. Yep, and then you hit apply and close, and you can double check that you have all these lovely little blocks. What's up?
I was just wondering, like, what you used to make the art. Like, was there a specific program?
I used Clip Studio Paint to draw. I just set my canvas size to really, really small.
Yeah.
Because you can use any drawing program, but just you have really small canvas, and a lot of programs have like a dot pen or like a 1 pixel pen.
You just export as a PNG and
Yeah, so the neat thing about Unity is that these are all just PNGs, which if you preview, I think like if you preview on Mac, it's like super tiny and blurry. I guess actually not, which is pretty cool, depending on your computer. But Unity, if you have that like no filtering, then it'll be nice and crisp, even though it's just a PNG. And I do PNG because you can do transparent backgrounds with that. Yeah. Another program that's useful for pixel art specifically is Aseprite. I think I wanted to write that down and I totally forgot. So if you look that up, ASE and then PRITE, very lovely as well. So now I have all my sprites imported. I wanted to quickly go over sorting layers before we move on to the tile mapping, because it's pretty useful For the game that we're making, we're not having a lot of layers because we actually don't have like a sky. We're just gonna have a blue background and it acts like a sky. But these sorting layers are really useful if you have, again, if you have multiple layers. If you have like your background, your midground, maybe you have some foreground elements, make it really nice and pretty. So again, these are shown up in, I think not just sprite renderers, but if most things that have sprites, you'll find it at the bottom here. And the higher the number, it means that it'll appear on top. Because think about the numbers as like laying paint down. So like my first coat of paint will be hidden under my second coat of paint, and so on. And there's different ways you could do it. You can create these sorting layers. So those are actually some custom ones I made for this example. So there's sorting layers, which again you can have in like a background layer or a midground layer, and then you can have the order in the specific layer, which has the same rules applied to it. So for example, let's say that I want my player, when it walks over the flag, that I know it's always going to be in front of the flag and not behind the flag. I can use the sorting order for that. So I want my player, no matter what it is, to be always like at the front. So I'm gonna give my player like an order of like 10, for example, because I know that I most likely won't use 10, and if I do, I can change it, or probably use a sorting layer. For sorting layers, you can, right here it says default, and you can click add, and like how we did with our tags, right? It says sorting layers. You add a little thing here, so I can, for example, say player. And our player will always, if I keep them at the bottom, will always appear first. So just to demonstrate that, I can actually put this back to 0, but I can give it the player layer, which is always at the front. So for example, if I give my goal the player layer, and then I give the player the goal, the order 10, then it's actually going to show up, you can kind of see, it's going to show up in front of our player. But I don't want my goal to be in the player layer, so I'm going to put it to default. And even though my goal has an order of 10, because it's in the default layer, it's still going to appear behind the player. But I probably want my goal to be, I'm just going to keep it at 0 because, again, I don't think that there's anything other than the player that's going to be on top of my goal. But I do want to just bring that up mostly through personal, painful lessons of why is this all wrong and why can I not see anything. Then I'm going to go into tile maps. So first I'm going to talk about what tile maps are. So this is an example of what it'll look like. This is not the sprites that I use, but essentially it's kind of like you have this palette of all your different chunks that you can use on your map, and then you can just kind of, like for example in here you can kind of see there's like this white outline, so the user has this one selected. So you can like select something kind of like a paint from like a paint palette, and then you just draw it onto your level. And this idea of units comes into play again because one of these, at least by default, one of these in your palette is going to have a size of 1 unit on your level, right? And so the actual tile map is a game object in Unity, so you'll see it in your hierarchy, but we'll go over how to make it, but essentially it's like you create it and then you put a bunch of sprites in it, and then you'll have this palette, and it's so useful, and I wish I found about it earlier for me personally. But we have a whole bunch of steps, which I will go with you, but what we're going to do is create an object, and then we have this special tile palette window. This is what it's going to kind of look like at the end. So actually we're going to bounce back and forth just so that it's not too much here. But as you kind of saw in the previous example, in this one, our dirt block, we're going to use that for our tile mapping. So here, and then that'll replace our ugly temporary ground. So here I'm going to right click. Actually, you can right click or you can click this plus sign, whatever is easier. I'm going to go to 2D object and then tile map, and you see a bunch of options pop up. There's hexagonal and isometric, which you can look into yourself if you'd like. Just different styles of, whatever you prefer. I'm just going to choose rectangular as my basic tile map. So we see for us is automatically an object is created for us automatically called grid if you can't read it. And then we have a new object that we get to name that's a child of this grid. I'm going to call it ground because that's the tile map that I'm working on. But we have this grid that has this like setting here with like our cell size. So for example, I can change this to be 2, and that's what I mentioned before, of like you can kind of customize it. By default, it's like these squares that we want. So I'm gonna leave it 1 by 1, but you can modify it if you'd like for whatever, whatever projects you have. And then we have the ground object, which has the actual tile map and tile map renderer, which is like a whole bunch of stuff. It generates it for you, which is super cool. But as I write here, so again, you generate it, the default settings for all these are fine for what we want and for most projects that you guys will have. So we're just gonna leave it be and showcase what you can do with the tile map. So I want that lovely tile map window, but I don't have it in my default view. So to get that, you can go at the top, go to window, and that's where you find any other tab that you might need. Like let's say there's a tutorial and you're like, I don't know where to find that. You go to the window tab. So I know, I can look around, but I know that it's in the 2D section. So I go window, 2D, and then tile palette. We have this tile palette pop up. I personally don't like when it's floating like this, so I'm gonna make it pop up here next to my inspector. So I'm just gonna bounce between my inspector and my tile palette, but that's fine because we're not tweaking anything in the inspector right now. So we have this ground object selected, which is perfect. That's what it shows here. It says ground. But now we want to create this palette that we're working with, right? This kind of paint palette. So here it says no valid palette. So I'm going to make one, right? Click on it, create new palette. Again, I'm going to name it ground. And the default settings are fine for, again, what we want. When I hit create, this menu pops up and it's just saying, where do you want me to save the palette as like a whole? So again, just to make it good practice, I'm going to create a new folder in here and call it tile maps. And it's one word. I don't know why. And then choose to go in there. So now we see here in our project view, we have a new object that doesn't have a preview because it's empty. It's called ground, which is fine. You don't really need to, just to showcase that it's there. But now we have this tile map called ground up here. And as you see here, it says drag tile sprite assets here. So I know, okay, so we have this grid set up, we have this layer set up, we have a palette set up, now we need to put paint in the palette. So we go back to our sprites here, and you can drag and drop individual sprites, or like, let's say like this, like individual chunks. For me personally, because I know I'm gonna use this entire image with all 9 sprites, I'm just gonna select this one that's outside of this white arrow and drag it up here, right? And now we have another window that pops up and you're like, oh my god, what do you want me to do? So this is now saving the individual little paint in a way that we have, these individual blocks. So inside of my tile maps folder, this is a personal preference, so you don't have to do this, but I create a new folder again called tiles, and then I put this in the tiles folder. And if you are curious, we have our ground tile map or palette now has a preview, and if you go into tiles, it's all of our individual little blocks. And this is made, done automatically by Unity, which is very lovely, right? I don't have to worry too much about it. But now, when I go to my tile palette, we have this at the top ground because that's the layer that we're on. Then we have ground selected because that's the palette that we're using. And then now we have this these sprites with spliced how we want them to be, right? So let's say I'm gonna get rid of this ground that's I have in temporarily. I'm just gonna get rid of it. And what you can do now is just draw it like you're painting a sky, painting an easel. Wow, that looks so much nicer. And then you can, so this, by design, I have this one be like, well, how this block suggests. So this is the very center. These are, you can't see it, but there are little rough edges. This is for like your corner pieces. This is the top piece. So let's say my level ends here. I'm going to put this corner piece here and put this corner piece here. Which, I mean, not a huge difference. Oops. But it has like a little bit of transparency, and so you have a little bit of crunch there. When I made this tile, personally, I made sure that like the edges of this block can infinitely tile, and so that's why when I zoom in, it looks repetitive, but there's no jagged edges. So when you make something like this, you want to keep that in mind. And then obviously with this, because it's like this really easy, cool tile map, I can go in and I'm gonna move my enemy real quick over here, and I'm gonna move my player over here. But let's say I don't want my player to go to the left, so I'm going to, I don't know. I'm just gonna make like a really tall mountain over here. And it's like, I love this because you can just draw it just like that, and it's done, right? So super easy. Boom, boom. And now, I mean, that looks pretty awesome. I mean, I can play, and then my player falls through, so that's not good. But I'll go over that in a quick second. Because we want to make the sprites physical, I'll go over that. But this is just an outline of what we did, in case you are looking back on this. A whole bunch of stuff, but essentially, like, the biggest thing is to generate it and then allow Unity to do its thing, and then you just have to drag those sprites into the palette. I want you guys to, if you have these cloud sprites that you're working with, just to do the same exact thing with the clouds, and then I want to walk around and help you guys out and see where it was at. Tile maps, cloud tile maps. So I'm going to go over it real quick with you. It's going to be the same exact process as we had for our ground, but I'm going to make it easier for me by having this. I personally click on the grid again, and I click new 2D object tile map rectangular, and that way it creates this layer. What the? Underneath the same grid, because for me the clouds are decorative. I just have them as like a decoration, so I don't care about the actual grid size for it. So I have it under the same grid here. And again, all of these settings by default are fine. So we have here, you could see you select the right layer, we have the clouds layer, but we need to create a new clouds palette. So I do exactly that, and our default settings are fine. We save it in our tile maps folder again, and then I want to go back to my sprites and drag all of these clouds in here and then put them in my tiles folder. So now I can click on a cloud and like put it like this. They're supposed to be big. They're like, big and fluffy clouds. We love clouds in the game development group because I noticed all my social posts have a lot of clouds too. Awesome. I'm just going to save with Command S, and then now we have some lovely clouds there as well. So again, clouds here, tile palette, make sure that this is clouds. I create a new palette with clouds, and then I drag this into the palette here. And then I can, click on it and stuff like that. And you can see when I click on it that they're like highlighted in orange to showcase what's on that tile map layer. So when I click on ground, the ground is selected in orange, right? So I notice actually that, and if you want to, you could put the clouds tiles on the ground layer. It just might not be a great idea to do that. I'm just going to pretty up my level here. Okay. And then save that. Okay, and then last thing is, as we saw before, our player fell through the ground, but we want the ground to be ground. So we have colliders with our tile maps. It's super easy to do. You just add a couple components and it does it automatically for you. So we just want to click on our ground and add these tile map collider 2D component, and then the composite collider. The composite collider, when you add it, will automatically create the rigid body for you, even though our ground is not going to be falling or anything. It's going to do it for you automatically, and you just want to change this to be static instead. That way it doesn't move. But essentially all it does is it takes all the edges of our, images and makes it into a collider. And by doing composite collider, it makes it into one big chunk. So I'll show you what I mean by that, but if you don't have this, it'll be all little individual colliders. And then again, if you combine these two with your colliders and your tile mapping, then you have a really easy way to create levels for your 2D platformers. And if you guys find the fact that you're selecting individual tiles and putting them and it's really tedious, there's a video on auto tiling that I linked that you can look into on your own, where basically you place a tile, you just place a bunch of tiles and it automatically selects the sprite for you based on the rules that you set, which again, there's a tutorial that I linked there. But really simple, really easy. I click on the ground. I'm just going to collapse this real quick. I'm going to add a tile map collider. And then our composite collider. So as you can see here, maybe, actually let me demonstrate this way. I guess with the tile map, it's hard to see, but these are like the little green outlines now, which shows that they're all individual colliders. So each of these little blocks on its own is a collider. And I don't need, for example, this block in the bottom left to be its own individual collider because my player will never touch that, which is why I want my lovely composite collider. We have to remember to tag this as ground, and that way our player can jump again. One last little setting, I should probably add that to the slide, is, here I can show you, we jump, yippee. And then we also cling to the wall, which is not good, and we'll fix that. One last thing I forgot to mention is we want this used by composite, and now the green lines go away. So if we don't have that, these are all individual colliders because which we can see because they have these green outlines, and then we can just check that off. And they're not anymore, which is awesome. Because now this is one big collider that our player collides with. And again, it has the ground tag here at the top. Okay, and that allows it allows it to be, physics stuff. Okay, so that's tile mapping. Pretty cool stuff, but I want to go into creating animations, which is both simple and not, so I will try to make it as simple as possible. For animations, so we have our different sprites. Now I want to make them move and do things especially for example, for our player, you'll have a lot of animations. You can have animations for enemies, depending on the state. If you're really fancy, you could have, for example, like a looping animation for some decoration, right? Like you have grass swaying in the wind and it just plays it on a loop. So you need a couple of different components, but Unity does make it kind of more automatic and easier for you, which is very helpful. But essentially, we need two more windows. We need the animation window and the animator window, which you can, again, open in the window tab. For our components, we have an animator controller, which is attached to the thing that we're trying to animate, and you need a new one for each thing that you're animating. That's essentially keeping track of, which state you're in, which animation is playing. We have our different animations, which are the individual clips, which makes sense. And then we have the animator, which uses the animator controller in a way to, again, keep track of what we're doing and transitions between the animations. There's a whole lot, but with our process, you don't need to kind of think about all these different things, right? So when we want to animate our player, we can pull up the animation window and then click on the player in the hierarchy view. And this is on the left here is the window that will pop up. And essentially when you hit create, I will show you this right now. I click on player, and then in my window, I open up my animation tab, like this. And it looks something like that. And it says, to begin animating player, create an animator and an animation clip. Okay, cool. But if I just click create, it'll do that for me. So it's just saying what animation do I want. Well, by default, I have player idle, which is just the player standing. And I'm going to save it in a new folder inside of my assets. I'm going to create a new folder called animations, right? So assets animations. And inside of animations, I call it player underscore idle. And I start off personally with the name of the object that this animation applies for, because again, I keep all my animations in one folder, and so that way I know, oh, this is for the player because it starts off with the player. The name of it starts with player. So I click save, and I just want to show you what happens when we do that. So we have this animations folder in my project tab that I made. We have this animator controller, which when I click on it, nothing shows up in the inspector. So it's kind of like, do you need to know that there's an animator controller if Unity makes it for you? Not exactly. There's this player idle animation, which I can select here or in a different spot. I'll show you. And so again, it's kind of automated. Automatically for us, Unity creates this animator component, and we see that this player controller here, which is the same as our controller in our project tab, is already like filled in. And again, Unity does this for you, so you don't need to know too much. You just click player, and then you have this animation tab, which I'm just gonna put down here. Now this animation tab, and so you click create, and it does this for you. So actually, I'm gonna maybe put it up here. So you can see at the top of my animation tab, it says player idle, because that's the animation I have selected. And to create an animation, all you have to do is, well, first you select the thing you're animating in your hierarchy view, because if I, for example, say if I select anything else, then this changes. So I want to make sure I have player selected, and then I have player idle, or, you know, if you want other animations, you can create a new clip. But I know that my idle animation is just going to be this sprite of my player standing. So I can just drag it onto here. And then you see here, when I dragged it onto here, at the very top is like this timeline of like 0 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and so on. At 0 seconds, or I think maybe this is milliseconds, I might be wrong. You see these little 2 keyframes that happen, because there's, and this basically represents my sprite, and you can see here it says player sprite, and then on the left there's a little drop down arrow, and when I open it, there's my tiny little preview of the sprite that I have. And that's it for my idle animation, right? Because my idle animation doesn't actually animate anything, but what later down the line, when I'm switching between different animations, I want my player sprite to go back to this one. And so I just create this with one single frame so that it's there. Yeah, so then, I mean, we can play it, but nothing should change. My player is still idle. So just this is a little bit of the same thing that I just talked about, just more written down step by step. And I'm gonna name all my animations with player underscore. So now I'm gonna show you animations that have actual frames with them, which is the same thing as, again, you drag and drop your sprites, and if you have multiple sprites, you can spread them out by just moving these little keyframes, these little like squares, and just like moving them further apart, and that makes it either slower, and if you move them closer, it makes it faster. And this little play button here will preview the animation that's playing in your game, or maybe both your game and your scene view. We can check. But I'm going to, real quick, I have my player selected, I have my animation window open, and I'm going to create a new animation. I'm going to click player idle, which is currently selected, and create a new clip. I'm going to put it in my animations folder, and I'm going to name it player running. So I know that this one has these 2 sprites, so I'm going to select both of them and drag them into here. And as you can see, they're located right next to each other. So I might move this one, maybe like, okay, I'm just gonna move it out. I forget if I think these are milliseconds. So for me personally, I'm not like a master animator, so I just kind of play around with it until I'm happy. And then I'm gonna drag this down here for real quick, because you can, when you have the player selected in our hierarchy view, you can click this little button to preview it. And then you can kind of see, so for these sprites, they're not super detailed, but the like shoulder joint and like the hip joint, you can see it's kind of like glitching out, and you're like, okay, well, that's not what we want. And that's because this is running on a loop, and it's starting off with like one way and then switch to another way, but then when it hits the end of this, it goes right back to the beginning, and so it instantly switches to the other sprite. So we want this same amount of time, which is 10, I think, milliseconds. So to have that loop, I'm just going to copy this first sprite that I have with Control C or Command C, and then paste it at the same distance away. So either Control V or Command V. And now we can preview it, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit more, but it's not the best animation because I drew these and I'm not an animator. But that looks pretty cool. I mean, he's moving. The player's moving, right? If I want to change the like speed of it, I can. What you can do is you can select, like, if you're just twiddling with your speed, you can select all the frames and like not like the different like in between pauses. Select all of them, and then these little blue bars appear if you can kind of see them. That this little like arrows thing comes up, and I can basically drag it out and in, and it'll like space them out automatically for me. So if I want the player to move a bit slower, or let's say like I move it out like this, now my player moves a little slower. Okay, I'm happy with that. And you can kind of keep twiddling. But that's my player. They're moving, and then we will actually switch to this state in a second, which I will go over how to do that. So based on this animation tab and this little, what I just showed you with dragging the sprites to this, I want you guys to do the jumping animation, which is going to be similar. That's what it's going to look like, and this is what you're going to have at the end in your folder. But again, this is an animation that's only one frame, so it's not gonna actually do much. But I just want to check in to see how everyone's doing with regards to all these different parameters and stuff. So I'm going to implement this jumping animation, which is not quite an animation, I would say, but we just want it for the sake of having it. So I'm going to name it player_jumping. And here I'm going to move my tab up here so I can drag and drop my sprites, because it's kind of, I don't know if you even can if they're in the same like place. So I'm just going to drag my jumping sprite here, and then that's it. So if I go to my animations folder, I can see that I have player idle, player jumping, and player running, which is what I want. So now that we have the animations prepared, basically, they're all individually prepared, we want to connect them together, and we're going to use the animator tab for that, which is, I call it the ASM, or the animation state machine, but online the tab is officially called the animator. But essentially each of these boxes is a different animation that we have, right? And they're kind of like states in this animator tab, and the player can only be in one at a time. This player idle is orange because that's the default one. The any state, entry, and exit boxes are these like special ones that every animator will have. And entry by default goes to like the default animation, which is I think also the first one that you make, which is why I make my idle animations first, which is kind of like, by default you go into idle, which makes sense. The any state one is obviously like no matter. So these little arrows here, these white arrows between the boxes, are transitions, And so if you have any transitions that go from any state, that means it's not going to check that like, oh, here I'm in the player jumping state, let me check these conditions to go into the player running state. It's just if you have any arrows from the any state, it's just like no matter what it is, if the conditions are true, go here. Exit, I've never actually used before, and I don't know quite what it does, but from what I understand, the reason why I have a link there, from what I understand is that you can have a sub-state machine where it's like more complex. I've never used that before, and so I've never interacted with that exit state. But this is kind of what the animator will look like once we're done. We have our transitions here, which I will probably jump into the editor for this. But we have our other window. If we go Window, Animation, Animator, and then we get this lovely default view with all of our stuff in it. So we have the exit box, we will ignore that, I will ignore that, any state entry, and our 3 animations that we made. And I'm going to just move this around. You can kind of just drag them around where I have this idle state, my jumping state, and my running state. I can right click on my state to make a transition. And it's going to have this little arrow that is attached to my mouse. And I'm going to click on a different state to make that transition, right? So from here, it's like, okay, I'm going to go from my idle to my jumping with some like transition time, and then these conditions at the bottom where the transition happens when this condition is true. So here on the left side of our animator tab, we have layers, and then we have parameters. So I'm going to go click on parameters, and then click this triangle on it says list is empty, so I'm going to create a new Boolean here. And I'm going to name it is running, or sorry, we're doing jumping, right? I guess I'll do running. I think I have a slide for jumping. So let me delete this. Forget how to do this. I guess I'll just leave it there. I need it anyway. Bro. There we go. Make transition. Player running. Okay. I'm gonna make a new Boolean, or I made one. I'm gonna name it is running. And it's a Boolean because I'm either running or I'm not running, so it's either true or it's false. So here at the bottom, I'm going to say, well, I'm going to transition from idle to running when my condition is true. Makes sense. And then we have a bunch of settings here, which says like exit time and transition duration that has these defaults. This basically is kind of just like has a little bit of a delay or like a transition between these states. And for my animations, especially with Pixlr, I usually just want to go to that next animation immediately when it's true. So I'm going to say, I'm going to check off this box that it has no exit time, and I'm going to make the transition duration 0. And that's just, I'll be applying that to all of my animation transitions, where no exit time, transition duration is 0. In this case, my player goes from idle to running when my condition is true, when running is true. And that's kind of reiterated here where we have these settings, my running Boolean, and then the condition checked here. And this is just written down. So I'll probably just do it for you because of time, do basically all of these transitions, which can be pretty tedious, but we only have 3 states, so it's not bad. So when we have one transition, we want to go to the other one as well, probably. So we make a transition back to idle when my running is false. If I'm no longer running, I go back to idle. And I, again, do the same thing. I check off has exit time, and I have no duration. This one also has no exit time, has no transition duration. But my jumping is another condition. Am I jumping or not? So I'm going to create a new Boolean, is jumping. And I'm going to add that here. to my conditions. Is jumping is true. And then make another transition back here where we have no exit time, no transitions, and then is jumping is false. But also, I want to be careful that I'm not transitioning back to my idle just when I'm not jumping. I also want to do that only when I'm also not running. So let's say I'm jumping and then I stop moving, then I'm gonna transition back to idle. Gonna do the same thing from jumping to running, where I have all this fancy stuff where I'm not jumping anymore, so that's false, and then I am running, so that's true. And then we go from running to jumping when we have running is, I guess, when we're still running, but then we are also jumping. Yes. Awesome. Okay, so we have this little trifecta of transitions here. And essentially there's really this, so you set up your animations like this, so I guess it's kind of like depends on, let's say you're an artist or whatever, but this is the part where I lied and we do a little bit of programming, and I want to do it real quick because it's pretty simple to set up, at least for the jumping, and yes, it's like a little bit simple, and then we will end there. And then the more complex part of flipping our player will probably be next week. So I guess I don't really have too many slides there for that. Real quick, so essentially we have this set up, and we have these booleans set up, but if you play your game, you'll notice that nothing actually happens, because we need to tell our player that these booleans change. So to do that, you do have to do that in your script. So I'm going to go back to my lovely player script because, that's our favorite one. Sorry. Let's see. Okay. So we have so many comments here. But essentially, all we want to do is set those booleans in our script where we want them to be set. And to be able to do that, we need a reference for my animator component. So like this rigid body here, I'm going to say, have an animator variable that has the type animator. In my start function, it's very similar to rigid body. I'm going to have animator is game object get component animator. And I will, again, also provide the script at the end. Or for those who don't like programming or don't ever want to program. Essentially, this is, with animations, you kind of sit down with your programmer and you're like, okay, where do these transitions take place? Where do I change this boolean? Or you just tell your programmer to do all of this. But essentially, I have my animator reference here. And then basically, I'm like, okay, where do I jump? Where do I start jumping? Let's see. Okay, here. Blah, blah, blah. So, okay, so right here, if can jump and vertical. So it looks like, okay, this is the place, like let's say my programmer tells me this is the place where we jump. So I'm going to set here my animator set boolean, which is set bool. And you can hover over to see what it does. It says in really small, but first you need to give it the name of the boolean and then the value. So I'm going to set boolean of is jumping to true because we are jumping. And then, so that's when basically when we press the space bar, that's when I start jumping. To do the opposite, I go to, I think it was on collision here, where now I touched the ground, now I'm not jumping anymore. So I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to set it to false, right? And that's it. That's the implementation for the jumping transitions. And for running, it's going to be very similar. We just have to check, okay, when are we running? So probably in here, we are saying, okay, we have some direction, which is an input, and then we're multiplying it by the speed. But basically, if my direction is not 0, that means we are moving. So I can just check real quick if my direction is not 0, then we are moving. So I'm gonna say my is running is true. And then in the same spot, I can actually say else. So basically, if we're not 0, we're moving. But if we if we're not 0, we're moving, and if we are 0, we're not moving. Right? So we just say we have these set booleans, which are like these little flags, and we do it in our script. And then now we can go and check our game, and you'll see that, oh hey look, I mean, my player currently moonwalks, which is another problem that is very much more programming, but we have the player animated, right? So when I jump, my player jumps. When I move, my player runs, right? It's pretty cool. And then also my player died. I think I didn't change the hitbox on my enemy. As we saw, the player moonwalks and jumps backwards, which is the way to do that is you flip your character, which I wanted to go over that today, but we're running out of time. I don't want to keep you guys late, so we'll just cover that next time. And because it's a little bit more programming heavy rather than animation heavy. So basically, if you're like an artist, you just set this up, and then the programmer takes kind of care of the rest in a way. So yeah, that's what we did here. And then real quick, I want to showcase that if you're still feeling a little rusty about your animations or your time mapping after today, these are the tutorials that I used to kind of brush up my own skills to make these slides. And then again, if you want to do more, you can create some more decorative tile maps, or you can, I mentioned this before, you can do auto tiling so that it's like done for you. And these are all links you can access with these slides. I'll send these out later. And then also I want to announce here first, before I send out any announcement on our listserv and stuff, is that we have our game jam planned, and we've been planning it for a long time, and it's basically kind of set in stone. So if you guys are interested in making a game from scratch within 2 days, this is the place to register. And if there's not if you have questions about like, okay, this information's not provided, like I need more questions, then if you register and put your email down, we'll send out a lot more emails about all that information regarding like those specifics. So yeah, you might also see like posters up on campus and stuff. What's up?
Is there prizes, or is this just for fun?
Currently, it's just for fun, because most game jams are just if you can make it. I guess it depends on like if we have the funds for it.
Okay.
We could try to add some prizes, I suppose. Okay, awesome. And then yeah, that's it for me. There's the typical feedback form. We have 2 more sessions after this one, and realistically, they're just going to be more programming. That's the sad reality of it. I'm going to try to make it as easy and understandable as possible, but that's just the truth. It's just, more programming for the next couple of sessions. And then basically 2 more weeks, and then right after that last workshop that we have the game jam. So I'm hoping to get as much done, and it's going to be, pretty like, it's like a boot camp where it's like, okay, it's pretty tough, but if you can kind of understand it, then hopefully you'll be in good shape to participate in the game jam. I guess one thing I want to note for the game jam, it's going to be on campus, in person. You can do stuff in teams or not. You can use any engine you want. There's no rules on that. There's going to be a theme. You're not required to follow the theme, but it's encouraged because it kind of makes it more fun. And we are looking to provide meals for all 3 days. So it's going to be like the evening of Friday through afternoon of Sunday. And hopefully, we can feed you guys.
Down in one area?
Yes. We're all going to be in a room. I mean, if you want to. You're not required to. You can come, like, you can, if you are comfortable, you can come to just the beginning of it and then, like, find out, like, who you're working with and then just go work online through Discord, like, whatever works for you. But we will have, if you want to do in person, we have an in-person room for that. And I will be there the whole time. I will also be participating, so I want to see what you guys make. And yeah, that's all for me. So thank you for coming. I appreciate it. And yeah, please reach out on Discord or through my email if you guys have any questions or are lost or anything like that, because I just want to help you guys learn more about game development.
There's a lot of schools on this.
Yeah. So we're trying to kind of get the Game Jam as just like an area-wide thing, so it's not just this club or just Binghamton University, but just the Binghamton area. So we're hoping that maybe high schoolers who are interested in game development can come out as well and participate. So we're trying to get the word out, and it's the first one that we're ever doing. Obviously, this club is brand new as well, so I'm hoping that it turns out okay. And if not, if you don't want to participate, you could also just stop by and see what people are up to. I'm hoping, again, I will send out more details. So if you want more details, if you're like on the fence of actually participating and you just want to maybe, like, you're kind of interested, you could still scan the registration QR code, because then I'll send out the emails for some more details through that, because you're not like obligated, like there's no fee to enter, it's completely free, and if you fill out the registration form but then you don't show up, like that's fine, you know. So if you're just maybe like, okay, I'm not sure, more details through the email that you provide for us through here. And obviously, if there's anything I missed, you can come to me at any point. So yeah, thank you for coming. Have a good night, and I'll hopefully see you next week.